swing. This is good. Pitch. Great. Might pop it. The little rascal might just pop it clean.
Well, as the Super Bowl got more popular, and we started blanketing that game with cameras. Well, we started with 5, then we went to 8, then 10, and that was the big deal. Every time they'd write up, NFL Films had 17 cameras covering the Super Bowl.
Real happy to have the opportunity to compete against you.
You know what I thought? Damn it, it's a hell of a thing for either one of us to lose.
When we first came up with the Lost Treasures series, one thing we ignored was the Super Bowl. I thought, what could possibly be left over from the most scrutinized, the most analyzed sporting event in history? But producer Phil Tuckett and his staff kept finding cans like this, cans of Super Bowl outtakes that looked like they'd never been touched. Well, maybe stepped on. So we got these cans, we pried them open, and we found every single frame of footage that we've ever shot in 34 Super Bowls. Now, minus all the big plays, of course. So what you won't be seeing in this film is Max McGee, reaching back for that one-handed catch in the first Super Bowl, Joe Namath waving his finger after number 3, Jim O'Brien's game-winning field goal in Super Bowl V, Garrow's slapstick routine during Super Bowl VII. What you will be seeing is an insider's history of a game that you thought you knew all about, but told with footage you've never seen before. And I can say that because until a few weeks ago, I'd never seen it myself. We found the very first roll of film we shot at what was then called the first NFL-AFL championship game. Now, I'd always heard that no one called it the Super Bowl until Game 4. Listen to our sound man slate his first roll that day in the L.A. Coliseum.
This is roll number 1. This is the Super Bowl.
What are we going to pick up, about 30 seconds? We'll pick up.
Actor Paul Rossi of TV's The Untouchables was the master of ceremonies on the field, and the rifleman, Chuck Connors, was there with his son, Steve.
Stevie, have you seen this band before? This is the Grambling College Band of Louisiana. And they are supposed to be one of the most beautifully disciplined bands in the country. I understand that they take steps of 120 steps a minute when they get going here. It'll really be interesting.
It wasn't like a championship game at all because it was a neutral site and there were thousands of empty seats. We only had 5 cameras because it seemed like such a mismatch. The mighty Packers of the NFL against the underdog Chiefs of the AFL. Sports Illustrated thought the same thing, and they just sent 2 photographers, Walter Yost and a hustling little redhead named Neil Leifer.
When I think back, I recently looked at some photographs of mine because I covered so many of these things that I didn't remember quite what the first Super Bowl was like until I looked at an old photograph of mine. And the picture was the coin toss for the first Super Bowl. There were 2 Green Bay Packers, there were 2 Kansas City Chiefs, and there was 1 referee who was going to toss the coin. There is no one in that photograph except the 5 people. Well, I went and did some research. So I got a picture taken at the '98 Super Bowl of the same moment. There were 80 people in the middle of the field. One team had 11 co-captains. There were 5 honorary coin tosses. There were 2 NFL film crews, 2 television crews, a number of still photographers. So when I think back and I looked at this picture, I really remembered what was so unusual that day is how unimportant the whole thing seemed.
Well, you just remembered it was quiet for a big game. I mean, you're used to going to the NFL championships were pretty amazing. They were like frantic. And this was it was like played in silence, it seemed, almost, compared to a normal game.
See by this shot the peristyles of the Coliseum, where you have Dawson calling signals. I always liked the way he huddled because he stood on one end and faced his players, which I always thought was a nice way to huddle. And it was always good for pictures, too. There was something very composed about that.
For the first and only time in Super Bowl history, 2 television networks shared the coverage of the game. That's because NBC had a contract with the AFL and CBS had a contract with the NFL. Bill Creasy was the CBS producer.
The sticking point was who was going to do the first game. And that was a serious matter between both network sports departments. I mean, you could cut the tension with a knife. It was difficult. To me, it was just a tremendous challenge, and at that time, it was the most challenging thing I'd ever faced in my life. The NBC truck was nearby to the CBS truck, and we had made up our mind that we were just going to go about this as that it was another telecast. We didn't disregard NBC. We weren't disrespectful to them, but we had to worry about putting out the best picture, the best sound, and to be totally prepared. The one incident that everybody seems to remember was re-kicking the kickoff in the second half. We were in control of the kickoffs and the communication from the television truck to the field. Lou Cusserow was the producer for NBC, and he came running in our truck, and, you got to kick it off again. You have to kick it off again. And we didn't ask them why. Got to kick it off again. We'll kick it off again. There have been rumors that they were still in commercial and that there was miscommunication, but I don't know for a fact what it was. It was the door to the truck opening up with Lou. You got to kick it again. You got to kick it again. Lou was bigger than me. So I said, yeah, sure, Lou.
They would have caught the ball and ran it 80 yards for a touchdown or something, and the whistles were blowing. And
That's all fantasy.
Well, yeah, but...
Yeah, but it didn't.
It could have happened.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, then there would have been big problems.
When we found these shots in the outtakes, and I saw all these acres of empty seats in our slow-motion footage, it reminded me of what an eerie, almost surreal setting it was. You'll only see this on our film footage because the network tape does not exist. If you can believe this, they recorded soap operas over the game tapes. And VCRs hadn't been invented yet, so there's no copy of the game except our film footage. Vince Lombardi didn't get carried off the field by his players. He just trotted to the locker room like it was an exhibition game. Now, for some reason, we went to the Kansas City locker room where we filmed the Chiefs showering and shaving. I remember thinking, this Super Bowl wasn't such a big deal. You can see the AFL actually drew first blood in the Super Bowl. Unfortunately, it was their own. In Miami at the second Super Bowl, I could see that the game was catching on. Thousands of fans arrived 4 hours early to greet the team buses. Oakland's Ben Davison looked really menacing, but I didn't believe the Raiders had a prayer against Lombardi and the Packers. Neither did anyone else in the NFL.
Well, the second game was Oakland and Green Bay. It was rumored to be Lombardi's last game as coach, which of course it did turn out to be his last game as the Packers coach. We sold out the game, but in the ticket business, we would call it a soft sell. That every ticket was distributed, and I'm not sure that everyone was sold at full ticket price. And we're not talking about scalping, because no one was interested in paying scalpers prices back in those days for the Pro Football Championship. We were just hoping to fill up the seats, which we did the second game in Miami.
Instead of marching bands, the halftime show had a Christmas theme, which I really couldn't understand since this was 3 weeks after Christmas. I heard later that somebody got a deal on these floats, which were left over from the Orange Bowl parade.
Pete Rozelle, who was from Southern California, was an L.A. guy. One of his friends was a guy named Tommy Walker, who was in the entertainment business like everyone out in Los Angeles. But Pete would bring Tommy Walker in to do the halftime shows. I remember Super Bowl II, they had these two big figures. One was the Green Bay Packer and the other one representing the Oakland Raiders, coming with smoke coming out of their top of their heads, coming closer and closer and closer. I didn't know what was going to happen when they finally approached each other, but if Tommy Walker said it was a good idea in Pete's head, that was good.
At least this had the look and the feel of a championship game. And the neutral site even worked.
Now, you're the home team, you're the visiting team. Who's going to call this coin?
The weather was great, and the stands were full.
Let it hit the ground.
All right.
Heads.
We were getting caught up in the drama of the established league versus the upstart league. So we added 5 more cameras. That's me here on the catty corner telephoto lens. I remember it was a great day to film a football game. But sadly, that's all in the past. Now we have dome stadiums, late starts for television, and I don't think we'll ever again see beautiful color like this at a Super Bowl.
Well, you know, the beauty of the light in the early years of the Super Bowl, and especially in Miami, which was always my favorite, there and Los Angeles, because they had the best light, period. Miami gave you this beautiful, crisp light with the palm trees in the background.
I mean, you look at this Bart Starr handoff in Miami with all the cocoa palms. I mean, what stadium had cocoa palms in it? It's been Miami. My favorite tree in the world. So I always sat in that one end zone and stared down at the cocoa palms. You could do like a panoramic and see the palms and the scoreboard. And it was like the whole game was unfolding in front of you down in Miami.
The Packers in the NFL still look dominant. But Oakland, they had some interesting characters, and our cameras had total freedom to roam the Raider bench. John Roush was the head coach, and one of his young offensive assistants let us get right in his face.
That you have him, right, I have him, you have him on the play pass, right?
Right, on the play pass? Yeah.
That's John Madden.
First and 10, I mean, a far formation running down, we can go under with him. See? We can also sometimes, on first and 10, run a strong dog or a red dog.
Damn, we done dropped a million passes.
Things had fallen apart for the Raiders. And crusty old pro Billy Cannon, he threw us off the bench. By comparison, the Green Bay sideline was absolutely serene. For long stretches, no one said a word.
Hey, Phil. Yeah, Phil. Combo, combo. Combo. Don't call that stuff from the sideline.
Even when Herb Adderley sealed the victory with an interception, the celebration was restrained.
That's my baby. Put the icing on the cake, kid.
Way to go, Herbie.
I was in the hallway outside the Packer locker room after the game. I was picking up some film gear and I was getting ready to leave. But I didn't realize that Lombardi was still in the locker room. And when he came out, it was quite a scene. It was our last glimpse of Lombardi as the head coach of the Green Bay Packers. Our biggest challenge was finding lost treasures from Super Bowl III. That's the Joe Namath game. A couple of years ago, we did a 2.5-hour recap of the game for ESPN. But we didn't use this shot of artist Leroy Neiman getting off the New York Jets team bus. To an ovation, no less. Why was Leroy Neiman on the Jets bus? Let him explain.
Well, I was a New York Jets artist in residence. The first time there'd ever been an office like that, and the last time, the only time in history of pro football. I've never heard of another artist in residence on a football team, so I don't know how necessary. The coach never thought it was very necessary. He didn't take to it, and I can understand why, but I didn't give any ground. It was a good opportunity.
Artist in residence? How do you get a title like that? I guess I was cinematographer in residence at NFL Films. Actually, that day, I was just one more cameraman trying to get a shot of Broadway Joe. NBC had television's first handheld sideline camera at Super Bowl III, and it was part of the feeding frenzy around Namath. None of us could get enough of the white shoes, the hunched shoulders, and that damn guarantee.
And Joe was the reigning king because he put his finger up.
I don't know about that. I know it's a hell of a loss for those folks who picked it the other way.
He came out of a generation that was taking place at that time to be your own man, to thumb your nose at things, you know. And Joe was right on time. You know, that was the time of Muhammad Ali and all those people when everybody was breaking down these musts. And Joe was a football player, and football is very organized, so he was the first.
Damn, we should have had 3 points that time, at least. Hell, I'm sorry. We should have some points up on the board that time, please.
Joe was one of those players like Mickey Mantle that was taped up all over, his whole leg and everything. There was always a little bit of a ceremony around when you taped Joe up. He was a bandaged man underneath his uniform. This is Joe hanging around the pool. Joe always had a few girls hanging around, and he didn't seem to mind at all. Clive Rush, who was a very kind of nervous wreck kind of assistant coach, would go around each night and check these rooms. And so the night before the game, I joined Clive, and we stopped at Joe Namath's door, and Joe answered the door. No conversation. He just answered the door and looked at each other. That was it.
But he was in on time.
He was in the room. He was in the room at that moment.
Alone?
No, I don't know. He didn't dare. He was sort of blocking the door there. There was no welcome, and I think Clive realized he had trespassed quite enough. He was a contemporary man, and I was new. I was different.
As we all know, Namath made good on his promise. He beat the Colts, and he brought credibility to the Super Bowl. The Jets' artist-in-residence saw it all firsthand.
The whole thing is so colossal, so extravagant, and so out of scale. What spectacle is bigger time than the Super Bowl? There isn't such a thing, is there? No way.
The sign said one thing, but we weren't sure the league office really meant it.
Even though NFL Films and the league office were paid by the same people, by the owners, oftentimes it was like we were speaking different languages. But God, those of us in the league office, it was like an international film company. It was like they were from Bangkok. That's the way we felt about them, because NFL Films say, okay, Steve Sable, here's 10 credentials. He'd say, I need 20. I'd say, okay, Steve Sable, here's 25 tickets for the Friday night party. He'd say he needs 50. A lot of times in those early games, they'd take 120 credentials. And you go down there and you'd see 60 workers. And say, well, where did the other 60 credentials go for? Isn't that the sales manager from the Holiday Inn where the NFL Films stayed the whole week? Isn't she the hostess over at the restaurant where we used to go on Thursday and Friday nights? They had some rather strange assistants, assistant cameramen. That's what they were always called. During the week, he was the front desk manager. On game day, he was an assistant cameraman. I never understood that.
We needed all 120 credentials to cover the halftime extravaganza in Super Bowl IV. Entertainment director Tommy Walker had gone from marching bands to Christmas floats, now to hot air balloons. It was a routine launch. At least I thought it was routine, since I'd never filmed a hot air balloon liftoff before. Then something went terribly wrong, and it turned into the NFL's version of the Hindenburg. Remember that old radio broadcast? Oh, the humanity! Well, the balloon crashed into the lower deck, scattered all these Southern belles who had just finished performing. And this was chaos. And it was sheer luck that no one was seriously hurt. And this was a real-life drama. But Tommy Walker's halftime show, they never missed a beat. In fact, the only casualties that day came from the recreation of the Battle of New Orleans.
We recreated the Battle of New Orleans. After all, it was the first Super Bowl to be played in New Orleans. And Tommy Walker, the entertainment halftime director, he wanted to recreate the Battle of New Orleans. Well, it turned out to be a disaster. There was gunfire back and forth either side of the field, a lot of smoke from the old-time muskets, hundreds of people on the field dressed up as soldiers, looking down on the field, sitting up in the press box, looking down on the field, saying, my God, what happened? And what it was that the hundreds of individuals who were part of the halftime show, they had eaten up the turf. So now the players came back out to play the third quarter, and they looked at the field. It looked like something that was a playground, a sandlot football field. I really do think that was the last time that Tommy Walker did a halftime.
People don't often think of it this way, but the team representing the older league was, in fact, the newer team. Minnesota came into the NFL as an expansion team in 1961, 1 year after the birth of the American Football League. So the Chiefs were really the old guard here. But the real history was taking place on the Kansas City bench.
There was too much leakage on that play. There's too much leakage down there, I'll tell you that, boys.
For the first time, a coach had agreed to wear a wireless microphone in the Super Bowl.
We can't make mistakes in this game.
My dad had visited Kansas City's Hank Stram the night before Super Bowl IV in his hotel suite.
Motion left, 61 toss man with a smush.
And he said, hey, he had a term that he used called shmush. He called a lot of people, hey, shmush. You know, he had this crazy vocabulary. He said, shmush, I can't do that. Are you crazy? I can't wear a mic during the Super Bowl. Come on. I said, Hank, look, there's nothing to it. The microphone is this big. You'll be the first coach in history to do this. You'll go down in the annuals. You'll be in the Hall of Fame. This will be the first time a coach is wired in the Super Bowl. And I could see his eyes light up. I could see a little smile on his face. He said, well, I'll tell you, Shmush. He says, Sable, what about the honorarium? Hank, I said, I hate to tell you this. There is no honorarium. This is something that has never been done, and it's going to go down in history, and you're going to benefit no end. He said, all right, get out of here. We'll do it.
It's all out there in that field for us. In the next 60 minutes, we're going to get it all. World champions in professional football. All right. Got to play. Come on. Let's go.
I didn't care who won. If Stram lost, we just wouldn't have used as much. But we would have had a coach talking at a Super Bowl on the sidelines.
Throw that damn thing on the outside, Leonard. He can't cover that thing, Lenny. That damn hitch on the outside.
The hitch pass Hank was calling was a favorite Kansas City play, one that they had used in the first Super Bowl against Green Bay. The idea was to get the ball to wide receiver Otis Taylor in the flat and then let him use his open field skills. Green Bay cornerback Herb Adderley closed quickly and held on until help arrived, limiting the hitch to a 3-yard gain. Now, 3 years later, Hank was calling for the same play.
Double wing, this is good. Hitch. Great.
This time, Viking cornerback Irsil McBee closed quickly, but he couldn't hold on, and Otis Taylor clinched the AFL's second and final Super Bowl victory. I like this cross-field angle of that famous play. We found it in the Lost Treasures, and we used it here for the first time.
That's it. All right. All right, boys.
Bingo. I hit the jackpot. I got the coach, he won, and he was wired. Can't beat that.
Yeah! World champions, baby!
After Hank's ride in the Super Bowl history, he wasn't sure whether or not to shake Bud Grant's hand.
Yeah, where's Bud Grant?
Big Ernie Ladd thought he should.
How you look for him when you beat him like that? How you look for him?
We're looking for him.
No, I'm gonna go out look for him. How you look for him? How you beat him? How you beat him? How look for him?
I can't
Make it known he ran from
him. Okay.
I'll always have a special place in my heart for Hank Stram because he wore the wire that made Super Bowl history, even without an honorarium.
Start. Picture roll 1.
By Super Bowl V, we were obsessed with covering everything about the Super Bowl. We went to the Orange Bowl at 4:30 a.m. on game day. And we got pretty much what you'd expect at 4:30 a.m. Darkness and silence. You can understand why we never used any of this. It was 2 hours before anyone else showed up.
How many programs do you have today?
We didn't know it at the time, but one of the trucks carrying the programs to the stadium had flipped over, and thousands of these souvenir programs wound up in a Florida swamp. That's why today, the program from this game is one of the most valuable Super Bowl collectibles. As that long morning wore on, we were getting desperate for things to shoot. We even spent an hour at the will call window. They should have called it the don't bother window.
Jack here, or Joyce McGowan?
Yeah, what can I do for you?
I just wondered if you had any. He told me to come back this week.
No, we don't have a ticket. Yes, sir.
There's 2 tickets left here for Mr. Chernin, C-H-E-R-N-I-N, by Craig Morton.
No, sir, they haven't come in yet. 80? Uh-huh. He hasn't brought it in yet, sir. No, sir, not here yet. Don't have anything for Thomas. Not yet.
Or Charlie Solomon?
No, sir.
Pete LaForgia?
No, sir.
Well, can I have your name, please? Because there's going to have to be something done about this.
Ella May.
I'm sorry?
Ella May.
Ella May? Now, what's your last name?
Weatherwax.
I work
Take a
for
blimp
him,
ride.
Huh?
Take a blimp ride.
Yeah.
Do you have tickets for Lewin, L-E-W-I-N?
When we looked through the outs 30 years later, we found someone we knew.
Gene was going to leave me 2 credentials.
That's Denny Lewin, then a gopher for ABC Sports, and he's trying to bum a couple of sideline passes from our crew. Today, Denny's the NFL's Senior Vice President of Broadcasting. And hey, Joe Brown, you'll notice we didn't give him any passes, all right? By 9 a.m., we were exhausted. And we still had 4 hours to game time. In our search for any signs of life, we ran across George Toma painting the field. George had prepared the field for every Super Bowl. This was the first one with artificial turf. It was quite a come down for the man we called the sod god.
Well, we had the sod god, marquee of grass, you know what I mean? Sports Illustrated called me the nitty-gritty dirt man. Being 71 years old, being 72, I'm born on Groundhog Day, so I'm a groundhog, you know what I mean? But I remember that was called, I believe, polyturf at that time. It was something new, and we had to do the same thing of decorating and painting it up. In those years, we used a Super Bowl trophy on the 50-yard line, and what I most remember for that, you know, he kept on saying, hey, they want it silvery. I said, you can't, you have to be gray. No, we go ahead and put silver on it, you know, metallic silver. What we did, we had a heck of a time trying to wash it off, and that's my job, whether it's artificial or natural. I have to do the job plus and then some.
George didn't have much of a budget. He had to scrounge up whatever he could find, like these miniature football markers for the end zone. He got those from the team he worked for during the season, the Kansas City Chiefs. For me, it was odd seeing football's signature event played on fake grass. Iron Mike Ditka playing on plastic.
That linebacker, Hendricks, is way outside me all the time now. Go ahead, let's go.
Ditka and Dan Reeves, number 30, were part of Tom Landry's Dallas Brain Trust that day. 2 outstanding players who went on to become Super Bowl head coaches. The Baltimore think tank included Johnny Unitas and a former school teacher named George Young. He's wearing a blue jacket there. George went from the Colts line coach to general manager of the Super Bowl champion New York Giants.
Come on, boom!
Another contributor on the Baltimore sideline that day was Sam Havrelak, number 17, who went from Colt running back to doctor of dentistry.
Miami's grass was probably the worst, other than the Astrodome, because the traction was so poor. It was so hot there all the time that the blades of grass actually kind of bent over from melting, so that you couldn't get much traction, and it was very slippery.
Everybody was sliding around on that nasty polyturf. Even John Unitas looked out of step. I couldn't put my finger on it. Maybe it was because he had long hair instead of his traditional buzz cut. Or was it something even more unthinkable?
Thinking back, you see Unitas on that phony grass field, which is weird to think of anyway. What else about Johnny Unitas that day was different?
He was wearing low cuts. It was the only time in his career he wore low cuts.
What's the story behind that?
I don't think there was a company that made high-top AstroTurf shoes. I don't think they had any. So he wore low cuts.
But somebody had to say, John, those were shoes.
Oh, yeah, we gave him a raft of baloney about it, you know.
What would you say?
Well, you know, we'd say the last time we saw a pair of legs like that, there was a message attached to them, you know, like a carrier pigeon, you know. He had terrible-looking legs. Still does. You know, we always used to say that he looked like a crab running sideways, you know, when he set up.
Maybe it was the low cuts. Whatever, Unitas fumbled and threw 2 interceptions in less than a quarter of play. He was finally knocked out of the game with broken ribs. Super Bowl V was a painful chapter in a Hall of Fame career. At Super Bowl V, we now had 15 cameras, including this 1,000-millimeter lens shot by a Super Bowl rookie. That's Phil Tuckett, who's still with us as producer of the Lost Treasures series.
Tripod, Stanley, you got that nailed down?
We also tried a new angle.
Okay, let's get this thing leveled off now. Just cart up and down the sidelines ought to really work out good today.
Put that geo.
We'll get some film action like they've never seen.
You gonna put chains on there, Stanley?
Yes, sir.
I understand you're going to be in the halftime parade, Stanley. It's one of the floats.
The idea was to mount a fixed camera on a movable dolly, just like television. The problem was we weren't high enough to get a good angle of John Mackey's famous tip touchdown reception or to clear the heads of the players on the Baltimore bench. We didn't get one usable shot from this camera, and we never tried it again. That season, Don McCafferty had replaced Don Shula as the Colts head coach, and the change was dramatic. They called Don Easy Rider, and he let third-string quarterback George Myra, injured running back Tom Matty, and George Young call most of the plays.
We're not having enough time to throw the ball. They got a safety blitz. All he's got to do is put a bow out mover and R and L. Where's Orr? Jimmy!
At one point, they even asked veteran wide receiver Jimmy Orr for his advice.
I agree with you after I watched him on the takeoff.
This never would have happened if Don Shula was running things.
No, I want you to go in there and just act like you're going to throw. Dog, low. And as soon as you see him pump to the right side, you haul ass.
When Earl turns to look at you, he's going to come up and you can run right by him. I guarantee you.
As soon as Earl pumps, let it go. All right? You ought to get 6 out of it.
The play Matty, Myra Young, and Orr cooked up was a flea flicker that Sam Haverlack improvised into a near touchdown. It was a play that typified a Keystone Cops kind of an afternoon. Guys slipping, falling, stumbling, fumbling. The press actually called this the Blunder Bowl.
So I was running back. I took the handoff, ran to the right, went out about 7-8 yards, turned around. Jethro Pugh was standing right there, so he was blocking my line of sight back to the quarterback, Orm Wall. Looked downfield and saw Eddie Hinton, who was in a place where he shouldn't have been. And Eddie, of course, caught the ball, was running toward the end zone, and had the ball dislodged on about the 1 or 2 yard line.
There were 4 lost fumbles and 6 interceptions. Finally, mercifully, it ended with Jim O'Brien's last-second field goal. The Baltimore bench went wild, but in the outtakes, we discovered a poignant postscript. The winning coach, Don McCafferty, left the field almost unnoticed, except by our cameraman, Gene Mason. The Easy Rider never made it back to the big game, and to this day, he's the answer to a trivia question. Who was the winning head coach in Super Bowl V?
This is our 6th Super Bowl. And I think when you talk about competition in sports, well, we have competition in NFL films too. And tomorrow, our fiercest competitor will be ourselves. We've got to be better than we've ever been. We have the best cameramen, we have the best equipment, and we'll have the best positions we've ever had. We've got to make this one our best effort ever.
Yeah. Forgot Hallmark.
No, I used Hallmark.
Boy, look at that shirt. I wonder where I got that thing from. I don't know. Boy, I'd like to. That's neat looking. Well, Super Bowl VI brought us back to New Orleans. And now, Tulane Stadium had fake grass. Instead of hot air balloons and gun battles, the league decided on a Bourbon Street theme. It was safer and easier to control, or so they thought. We all know there are things that you see on Bourbon Street that you wouldn't want to see on a football field.
We had heard rumors during the week that there was a dancer on Bourbon Street in New Orleans, and there were rumors that she was going to come out and run out onto the field.
Ah, this is the stripper game. This is the stripper and the inflamed halftime entertainment.
She wasn't really a she, that it was really a guy, transvestite.
I mean, strippers on the field? Can you imagine this?
And sure enough, they caught her. For during those early days, before we really started to tighten up security, we did have some green flies down on the field.
Get the hell back! Get back! Get your foot off the white line. Get back up there.
Joe Brown was busy tracking down green flies that day, but he didn't say a word to Leroy Neiman, who was by now a fixture on the Super Bowl sidelines.
He was a Roselle favorite. Pete liked him. He was a New York guy, and so Leroy would be on the sidelines during those early Super Bowls.
It's a nice way to show off, and it's a nice way to be a part of things, you know? And it's a nice way to show your wares straight away, that you can do it.
Leroy was unique, and if you don't believe me, just ask Leroy.
It takes a little bit of vanity and a little confidence and to put yourself in that position. The camera's over your shoulder and I'm sketching on a 40-yard line or something. Guy comes over my shoulder with an NFL camera or something. There better be something there, you know? I mean, you can't, in other words, you can't fake it. Everybody's showing off a little bit, you know?
A lot of coaches, they'd look over, especially the assistant coaches, they'd look over and they'd give a double take, say, who the hell is that on the bench? And what the heck is he doing? Because he's there with that big handlebar mustache and very quietly doing his sketching and sketching this, sketching that.
I think there was only room for one of us. But the thing is, I'm not going to go away. I'm going to stay till the end with my way of doing things.
But of course, right now, I wish I had some Neiman's hanging in my living room at home or in my office.
Cowboys coach Tom Landry had returned with a team of Super Bowl veterans.
What happened today? Can't tell until the game's over.
Don Shula was back as well with a much younger Miami team, including his 12-year-old son, ball boy David Shula.
You got it from Miami. You think he's got to win. I got to. Why? All this way for nothing, you know. No sense in losing now.
David went on to become an NFL head coach himself with the Cincinnati Bengals. Shula had some excellent players like Bob Greasy, who would become a Super Bowl hero. But another Dolphins Super Bowl hero is barely remembered. And that's nose tackle number 75, Manny Fernandez.
Yeah, I don't think Don ever really realized the distractions we were running across in New Orleans. For a 25-year-old kid in New Orleans for the first time, drinking a few things we weren't supposed to drink even for breakfast. So it was really a party. We went out there and partied hardy, but didn't play very well. They had put a wrinkle in specifically for our quick flowing defense. They started, I guess, game planning in cutback runs. And we got shredded pretty good. They were cutting off our weak side and just control the ball game, control the tempo. If I had to evaluate my personal performance that day, I thought I played pretty well. But unfortunately, I couldn't play left and right. I'll tell you, it was difficult to be a part of that loss. It was the toughest thing in my life, toughest loss I've ever been associated with. We were there. We had the opportunity. You never know if you're going to get back. And we just let it go, and strictly, I think, from a preparation standpoint, and the fact that, of course, Dallas was a great football team.
Roger Staubach and the Dallas Cowboys left the field winners in Super Bowl VI, but Manny Fernandez and the Dolphins would be back. A Super Bowl pattern was established. Lose one year, come back and win the next.
Mark, I think Jeff's coming around to prop me up, for Christ's sake. Like El Cid, for crying out loud. I'm sliding down in the seat. In the beginning, the Super Bowls were fabulous events. I mean, the excitement, the fun, the carrying on, and it got bigger and bigger, and the parties got bigger and bigger. It just got so big that, as far as I'm concerned, I didn't know what was going on anymore. And as I started to get older, it got so physical that just to last it, you had to be young and in good shape. And I wasn't getting any younger, and I wasn't getting in any better shape. And they used to tire me out. And I wanted to be General Patton, wanted to be leading the troops. So I went and stayed the first half, and then I'd sneak out the back, get in the cab, go back to the hotel, order room service, and watch the rest of the game on television.
Under Big Ed's leadership, NFL Films was now making a name for itself.
Steve Siebel.
Don Shula now faced one of the most unusual coaches I ever met, George Allen.
I always stand right by the goalpost for two reasons. One, it's the safest, you know, and then number two,
keeps the other guys.
Yeah, right. See,
listen, real happy to have the opportunity to compete against you.
You know what I thought? Damn it, it's a hell of a thing for either one of us to lose, because I mean this. I appreciate the job you've done, and we've had similar backgrounds and frustrations, and It's if you after the game, I think we should shake hands,
Right.
one way or another.
No way, yeah, no way we won't.
Allen was so thorough in his preparation for Super Bowl VII that he actually had a scout chart the movement of the sun in the LA Coliseum. For those of us who were photographing the game, we probably should have been charting the sun ourselves.
We're taking the light readings. You know, the normal exposure should have been like 5/6 at a 500th with the film we were using. But we keep reading like 4, 3, 5. We're going, what the hell? Give me your meter. And we're all standing out like this. And we can't believe the exposure. It was smog. It was the first smog exposure at a Super Bowl. And the whole game is played in this very diffuse yellowy light. And it wasn't sunset. It was smog. But you can look at these pictures. They all have this little tint of yellow to them. I always like Kilmer, you know, he's one of those little gutsy quarterbacks. You can see his face so clearly. Not only did he wear the single face mask, but the light's like this. It's like you lit him.
We loved shooting Billy Kilmer. He was so expressive. But George Allen was even better.
That's the most important thing is to be visible.
George was unlike any other NFL coach.
Cheer him on, cheer him on.
He was a cheerleader, and he demanded the same from his staff. Like that guy in the suit, that's Redskins security chief, Ed Boynton. We called him Double O. Shula's bench was less emotional. The Dolphins had been here before, and Don knew what to expect.
Well, you know, Don wasn't one of the greatest coaches in history for nothing. The next year, he moved us so far out of Los Angeles, we needed a helicopter to go back and forth. We were much more focused to begin with. You know, getting back and having been embarrassed the year before, just one thing on our mind, and that was winning that ball game and then becoming the world champions. That was absolutely one of the greatest games I ever played.
You remember what I said about Manny Fernandez being a Super Bowl hero? Check out number 75 stats from Super Bowl VII. 10 unassisted tackles and 1 sack. And that's for a nose tackle.
He's flying outside and stringing it out, and then Fernandez came off the head and made the play.
Safety Jake Scott was voted the most valuable player, but hey, looking at the footage again, I'm convinced that Manny Fernandez should have won that award.
To be honest, I didn't even know there was a Most Valuable Player award in a Super Bowl. I had no idea. I hadn't thought about it. Defensive linemen never win anything. You know, I was just thrilled that we won. We were world champions. We were partying. We were right back to New Orleans again mentally within seconds of that final gun.
Redskin guard John Wilbur once told me that George Allen's constant worrying about Super Bowl distractions was the biggest distraction of all. And by the game's end, the Washington bench was overrun with distractions.
The first couple of games, it really didn't make any difference. We didn't have that many extra people on the field. But as the game became more popular, we'd have people go down on the sidelines, and you'd say, how the heck did he wind up down there? It was as if they'd spend Saturday night making their own credential that said NFL, AFL sideline pass, and they'd be down on the field. One guy had an Eastern Airlines baggage ticket as his credential on the field, and he had gotten by the security and gotten down onto the field.
Get out of here! We don't need you on the sidelines. Get him out of here!
Can I see that pass? You don't belong down here. You don't belong down here. Security, get him out of here.
By 1972, the Super Bowl had come full cycle. The game had started as a curiosity in the half-empty LA Coliseum. Now, it was the hottest ticket in sports, and the whole world was watching.